If the universe is a hologram of some sense, in some way, it suggests that there may be two very drastically different levels to reality, that the concrete reality we see, you know, when we look at these chairs and at you know, the trees and the clouds and everything like that, are just one way that reality manifests, and that at some deep level there's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy that is holographically interconnected, where every portion of the universe is contained in every tiny area of the universe. So if the universe is a hologram, it means, as William Blake said, that quite literally you can find the universe in a grain of sand, that every portion of the universe contains some semblance of the whole universe. In our Western way of thinking, we're so attached to the idea that when we come up with a concept like an apple or an electron or whatever, that exists out there, and we forget, it's kind of like fish unaware of the water in which they swim, that the conceptual pigeonholes we use, words, to describe reality, are phenomena inside our head. They're not out there. If you imagine that you've got an aquarium in which you have a fish swimming, you have a TV camera facing the front of the aquarium, one facing the side of the aquarium, and you have a monitor attached to each camera. Now you also imagine further that you come from a culture that's never seen aquariums, never seen fish, never seen monitors or cameras. All you are privy to is the two images on these screens. He says that maybe, you know, if you look at these two screens, you're going to see a side view of a fish and a frontal view of a fish. And because you don't know what the deeper reality is, the reality of the aquarium, you may assume that these are two separate things. Two different fish, two different objects, but every time one fish moves, the other is going to make a corresponding movement. And you may then jump to the conclusion that somehow the one fish is signaling the other or communicating the other to say, hey, do this, instantaneously. And Bohm says this is what we've done with subatomic particles, that we assume that an instantaneous communication is going on, when that's not really what's going on at all. At a deeper level, a very holographic level of reality, every particle in the universe collapses to a sort of cosmic unity. They're not signaling each other. They're like that fish where there's the level of the aquarium. And so what that means, talking about words, is that there is no separation between electrons. Furthermore, there's no separation between people. It's a funny thing in science. The great physicist Hermann Bondi called it the lure of completeness, that we tend, when we find some sort of outermost perimeter to what we can measure, we assume there's nothing beyond it. And I refer to it, it's kind of like you know, in ancient times when we only knew a certain portion of the world, people always seem to say beyond the edge of the map there be monsters, that there was nothing there. And the same thing is going on in physics, that we have, with our technology, reached down to a certain level in reality, and it's a common prejudice among many physicists that beyond that level, nothing exists. There be monsters. It's just a void. And it's an interesting thing that we, as I say, we have to have this lure of completeness. We have to feel that our knowledge of the universe is all that exists in the universe. Bohm, I think, is very wisely is one of the few physicists who comes out and kind of says the emperor has no clothes, says what rational basis do? It's just prejudice that we assume nothing exists beyond this level of reality. And he feels that there are all kinds of domains of reality beyond this level, this microscopic level, and he theorizes that there may be untold, uncountable, subtler energies in these levels. Well, this gets away from Bohm into Pribram, but it's equally interesting with equally profound implications. Pribram, as I said, says that we're thinking with holograms inside our head, and that out there exists something that's more akin to the radio waves in the room from which your TV gets the image. So in essence, we're kind of conscious TV sets. And what we think is reality when we look out here is really just the image on the TV set inside our mind, but doesn't exist out there. And Pribram says this is why there's all kinds of evidence that we seem to respond more to the models of reality in our head than out there. In the holographic universe, I give an example of a psychologist who did a study where he took soldiers and marched them all the same distance, but he told some they marched, like he'd marched them all 30 miles or 20 miles, but told some they marched 10, some they marched 20, some they marched 30. But they all marched the same distance. At the end, he took physiological readings and discovered that physiologically they responded not to the actual mileage that they had marched, but to what they had been told, the model of reality that they assumed they had, the reality in their head. If the universe is organized holographically, we've always believed, you know, that there is no connection between the brain and the body, and of course, I mean, for most of the history of medical science in the West. In the past couple of decades, we're starting to say there's a connection, and we're sorting out certain pathways, you know, the neuropeptide systems, that sort of thing. But if the holographic model is correct, there are so many interconnections between the brain and the body, there ceases to be a division. So it becomes almost a moot point to say, what is the pathway? How is the brain connected to the body? Because there's no difference, just like there's no difference between those two electrodes. But there's another, I kind of think, an even more profound implication of the holographic idea, and this gets back to this notion that Bohm says that if everything is a continuum and infinitely interconnected, all of our ideas, all of the words we use to describe the world are artificial, are sort of just come out of our own belief systems and don't exist out there. And that's something that's had a deep effect on my thinking, because it seems to be our cultural upbringing imprints in us what we can perceive, that sometimes we literally can't perceive something because we don't have the vocabulary, the cultural and perceptual vocabulary to see it. But in his dreams, there's a wisdom that's way beyond him, that his dreams are constantly trying to teach him not to be a jerk, or not to be selfish, or not to be greedy, or whatever. An uninterpreted dream is like a letter left unopened, and I believe that. I think we have to do that as well. There are metaphors and symbols that it speaks in the language, what Erich Fromm called the forgotten language, the language of the psyche, this symbolic language of the dreams. And in fact, all of the mystical experiences I've had, instead of looking for them and going, this is an angel, this is a ghost, this is a spirit, I look at them, I go, this is real, and other people have seen it, but what is its psychological meaning? What is it meant to teach me? How is it a projection of my consciousness, my psyche, and perhaps the psyche of those who've witnessed it with me? When you encounter something that is truly of another reality, you can't, your perceptions and trying to pull it out of this blur of energy and make it into a hologram don't quite know how to put it into form. Kind of the story of the blind man and the elephant, where they go up, one touches the trunk, one touches the leg, and says, well, this animal's like a snake, no, this animal's like a tree, because they're not seeing the whole picture. Let's look at shamanistic experiences, and let's look at near-death experiences, and look at their similarities. Maybe they're all portions of some proverbial elephant that we're missing. And I think he's right. I think that they're all experiences with the other channels on the holographic TV set, and when we interpret them at face value, we're being like the blind man and the elephant, and we've got to look at the larger picture. The real evidence, for example, of a synchronicity is that our psyche does have reverberations in the world out there. And if that's the case, you know, how do we begin to really look at how to manifest things, you know, not just simple coincidences, but positive things in our life, and control our thoughts enough that we don't manifest bugaboos and demons and things like that. Because we are like the sorcerer's apprentice. We have to learn to deal with this ability, and that's why it opens up slowly, because before you can deal with it, you don't want those gateways blown open. One common thread that goes through all these roadmaps is that these other levels of reality are reached through the inner universe, through the head. You know, by going into that inner universe, that's where the vastness of the true universe exists. And in our culture, we think that what's inside our head is less real than what's out there. I believe that what's inside our head is more real than the consensus reality. We just haven't accessed the level that shows us how profound and magical that interior reality is, most of us. I think at this point in our development that we have manifested in the physical because we don't have a consciousness that's developed enough to deal with reality with its full grandeur and plasticity. That for us it would be very frightening if there weren't solid rules, if everything started to slip and slide. But I think as your soul goes along, it starts to learn to deal with more than this reality, with other levels on the holographic television set. And when you start to open those doorways, that's when reality, the plasticity of reality, starts to seep in. But then you go through a sort of shamanistic rite of passage, because you've got to go through, most people go, put an interpretation on it. They go, oh, this is an angel, or this is, you know, a demon, or a UFO abduction. And if you do that, you're missing the basic lesson of shamanism, which is that everything that you experience in the non-ordinary reality of the shaman has psychological meaning for you. That you are entering a level of reality that responds so directly to your thoughts that your every thought helps what manifests. And in that instance, you can't ask what is there, but why have I created what is there?